Welcome to our continued studies in the book of Esther. We pick up from where we left last week at the end of Esther chapter 1. We saw King Xerxes showing off his powers and his wealth to the governors of his 127 provinces and other invited guests at the palace. King Xerxes' motive was mostly aimed at persuading his governors to embrace his kingdom expansion motive in the acquisition of Greece. His motive was to convince these governors that he had the power and enough resources and the ability to pull together a mighty team to fight the Greeks. However, we know from history that Xerxes lost badly to Alexander. I therefore take the liberty to title the details of Esther chapter 2 as Living La Vida Loca at the palace at Susa. It was during this lavish party that the king is forced, and I think using the word forced here is a good choice of a word, because I think Xerxes is forced to let go of his beautiful wife because of the agreement that he writes. Queen Vashti, who was the orphaned daughter of King Belshazzar and the granddaughter of King Nebuchadnezzar, is forced out of the palace. Chapter 2, therefore, begins with the king regretting his decision to send his beloved queen out of the palace, after his advisors, and especially Memucan, tells him what he should do to his wife. Drunk Xerxes, of course, without second thoughts, thinks Memucan has uttered the most precious words of all time. Little did he know that our absence would depress him big time. Little did he know that our wisdom played a big role in his welfare. I guess after all, King Xerxes realized he's human. Chapter 2, verse 1, therefore reads, "But after Xerxes' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made." The Message translation Bible reads, first of all, let me issue a disclaimer here to begin with. Personally, I think Eugene Peterson in the Message translation Bible often takes some liberties that I would not take when it comes to translation of the scriptures. But for the sake of understanding our text, let us just consider Peterson's words here. Listen to Eugene's translation. I begin. Later, when King Xerxes' anger had cooled and he was having second thoughts about what Vashti had done and what he had ordered against her, the king's young attendant stepped in and got the ball rolling. "Let's begin a search for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint officials in every province of his kingdom to bring every beautiful young virgin to the palace complex of Susa and to the harem run by Haggai, the king's eunuch, who oversees the women. He will put them through their beauty treatments. Then let the girl who best pleases the king be made queen in place of Vashti." End of quote. Well, after the king's anger had cooled off, or after his anger had been appeased, another translation reads, he remembered what Vashti had done and what had been decreed against her. This is where we pause and reflect. Xerxes must have wondered if Memucan's words of so-called wisdom added any value to his life. Memucan still had his wife at home, and Xerxes, well, he did not have his queen. The wisdom of friends can sometimes be misleading, but that's an application for another day. So time had passed, And this is pretty simple math, so let's look into it. Xerxes ruled from 485 BC, and the story of Esther begins during his third year. That makes it year 482 BC. Simple math, right? Therefore, when this drunken king, Xerxes or Ahasuerus, as his Hebrew name suggests, heeds the words of Mordecai to send Queen Vashti away from the palace, and Esther is entered into the king's beauty contest by Mordecai. It's about 3 years in between. I promised. Simple math. So, chapter 2, verse 16 states, it was in the 7th year of King Xerxes' reign that Esther was made the new queen, making it year 479 BC. So between 482 BC, a couple things happened. Queen Vashti, or Queen Amestris, as his Greek name suggests, our Greek name suggests, leaves the palace. And of course, Queen Amestris or Queen Vashti has a son by this name of Antaxis in year number 483. And of course, year number 479, this is when the king realizes that it's too much here. I'm so lonely. So between 482, basically what I'm saying is 482 BC and 479 BC, the king is very lonely, and he realizes this, and people around him can see it. He is just making ridiculous and stupid mistakes. He has had some time to reflect on the role of Queen Amestris in the family. And apparently, he missed her big time. In fact, he missed her so big that the author of this book picks up on his moods. Chapter 2, therefore, verse 1, is referring to this 3 to 4 year period when the king is lonely and preoccupied with the war with Greece. And of course, Alexander is kicking his butt for real, and he begins to question his decisions. Xerxes begins to think about his beloved queen and the role she played in his life. During this time, Xerxes is concerned about his depleting wealth, and the Persian treasury is bleeding big time. To make the matters worse, Xerxes loses the war to Alexander. And as a result, he's embarrassed. His ego has been reduced to nothing. And he begins to get discredited by his friends, by his governors, and even amongst his people. He's not too sharp after all. He's a drunk after all. His status in the Persian Empire is not looking good at all, and he seems to be losing it. He is not being satisfied with his concubines, as many as they are, and as beautiful as they are. These virgins are not satisfying Xerxes. And he begins to eye his officers' wives. Herodotus, the historian, records that, and I quote, King Xerxes lived a life of sexual indulgence of the highest degree, end of quote. History states that he began to take whatever he wanted and whomever he wanted. The stress of Vashti's absence and losing the war and just building a bridge that ends up collapsing is too much for this Persian playboy. Xerxes is out of control and drunk, not only with wine, but with other spirits and with power. Xerxes and his sexual indulgence and disrespect goes overboard. He has unchecked powers and uncontrolled passion. His affairs at the Ployboy mansion at Susa with his wives and with the wives of his officers was just too much for them to bear. History shows that it was out of this behavior to take whomever he wanted and whatever he wanted at whatever time he wanted that leads to his death. Because in 465 BC, one of his officers whose wife had been taken by Xerxes could not take it anymore, but he goes ahead and assassinates him. I'm going to fast, or maybe just let me slow down here and let's go back to chapter 2, verse 1, where we find Xerxes cooling down from his anger. And then he begins to think of his queen. But there's nothing he can do, for he issued a decree which was not reversible. He wrote the law, and that law cannot be reversed. He's reminiscing upon spoiled milk. However, he evaluates Vashti's crime and the decision made against her as if that's going to change anything. And he knows he has no option. He has no way out. He probably regretted, or he drank too much on that particular day. Vashti is history, and there's nothing he can do but be lonely and wish he had remained sober. There's nothing Xerxes can do but wish that Memucan never made that suggestion to send his queen away from the palace. The laws cannot be repealed. When reality sets in, he makes peace with Vashti's absence, and then his anger begins to subside. Remember the plan that his advisors came up with? Again, let me reference the Message Bible here. It says, the king's young attendants stepped in and got the ball rolling. Let's begin a search for beautiful young women for the king. He's too depressed and illogical. That's my emphasis. Let the king appoint officials in every province of his kingdom to bring every beautiful young virgin to the palace complex of Susa and to the harem run by Haggai, the king's eunuch who oversees the women. He will put them through their beauty treatments. Then let the girl who best pleases the king be made queen in place of Vashti. End of quote. The search for the next queen begins, and all the beautiful girls are gathered by force to come to the palace in Susa. This is quite a crazy idea because according to Persian culture and customs, this is not how men found their brides. There were protocols in place, and family courtships, especially with large dynasties, there was a protocol. For example, King Darius, King Xerxes' father, claimed his wife from other royal families. So this is a weird strategy. But again, the text says the king's young attendants stepped in and got the ball rolling. Let's begin a search for beautiful young virgins for the king. These attendants were young. Probably they lacked some wisdom in just helping the king put a strategy together. King Xerxes, in his wild imagination, thinks to himself, aha, this is a great idea. All the beautiful girls from all the provinces. Well, unfortunately, this will not be like The Bachelor, where the girls have to go home after the season. They become the sexual slaves to the king. Okay, let me be polite. They become concubines to the king. There's nothing new under the sun. Hugh Hefner wasn't the first man to invent the Playboy mansion. Xerxes and his young servants invented it. Well, this will be much more than a beauty pageant, believe me. Beautiful girls are picked up from all over against their will and brought to the palace for the king's pleasure. These are the most attractive girls in the 127 provinces of Persia. And as the girls start flocking to the palace, they know that each one of them will be used by the king with no guarantee of a marriage. They will not be returning home to their families, but will live as forgotten women and beautiful girls or ladies but there will be sad and heartbroken concubines at the palace. Some will be happy as they get to be associated with the king and they get their needs met, but many will wish they were never born. Imagine the battle and the bickering and the jealousness and the catfights at the palace as the girls scramble for their turn to please the king. Imagine the conflict resolution skills that Haggai, the concubine headmaster or principal, if you may want to call it such, he has to possess very high intelligence, IQ, to deal with the ugliness of the disputes that arise from this many virgins and concubines. He has to train them on how to please the king and place an order for a 12-month beauty treatment program for each girl, as verse 12 states. A contemporary comparison would probably be the Bachelorette. Imagine all those girls fighting for one man. Lots of fake tears and some real ones. Lots of drama. These girls, all of them, they know that they were going to lose their virginity to the playboy king, but only one of them will be chosen to be the next queen. These girls will live the rest of their lives with false hope, hoping that maybe one day their name will be written or identified with that of King Xerxes. Maybe one day they will live to be called the king's wife. At this point, I think that this Xerxes guy was like Charlie in 2.5 Men. Listen to this. Verse 12 and 14 reads, before a young woman's turn came to go to King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, not your own program, prescribed for the women. 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. When the young woman went into the king, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. And then verse 14, in the evening, she was to go in. And in the morning, she would return to the second harem in the custody of another eunuch by the name of Shashgas, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. You see why I named this chapter Living La Vida Loca. There were 2 harems, one for the new girls and the other for the used girls under the second principal by the name of Shashgas. But it is the ugliness of this mess. It is this ugliness, this craziness that brings Esther to the palace. It is this mess that God sets Esther aside to rescue his people. A people who will end up becoming great grandparents of Jesus. All this is taking place among the people belonging to the tribe of Judah who compromised the people who were part of the southern kingdom. By the way, in chapter 2, verse 5, we see Esther and Mordecai introduced for the first time. The verse reads, now there was a Jew in the citadel of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with King Jeconiah of Judah, whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had carried away. Surprisingly, the author here introduces us to Mordecai's heritage. He is the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish. Mordecai's lineage is finally being revealed to us here. He is the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish. And this man originate from the tribe of Benjamin and are connected to King Saul. Well, at this time, it really doesn't matter, for they are in captivity and in a foreign land. And in addition, God had rejected King Saul anyway because of his disobedience. And Mordecai is in exile, and he is 3 generations removed from his ancestors. So the mention of King Saul here and the connection doesn't help him at all. Well, we also meet Esther, who has been raised as a beautiful woman by Mordecai. I believe she's between the ages of 16 and 24 at this time. And as soon as she gets to the palace, Esther wins the heart of our caretaker, a eunuch by the name of Haggai. Esther is described as being beautiful, both from outside and inside. In verse 7, we read, Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his cousin, for she had neither father nor mother. The girl was fair and beautiful. Another translation reads, Esther was beautiful and lovely. Mordecai had adopted and raised Esther well enough, and she grew up beautiful and lovely to look at. Jewish rabbis and historians record that there are 4 women in Jewish heritage, Jewish history, who were very beautiful. And these included Sarah, Rahab, Abigail, and Esther. Esther was for sure a head turner, and the author here makes sure that we know that. He uses 2 adjectives to describe her: beautiful and lovely. The ESV reads, she had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. The Orthodox Jewish Bible reads, Esther was lovely in form and beautiful in appearance. Another translation reads, the young woman had a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. There you have it. Esther must have been stunningly beautiful, because as soon as she gets to the palace, she wins the heart of Haggai, the king's eunuch. Now, Haggai knew how the search process worked. He knew how the search for wifely material girls for the king looked like. He knew what to look for in a virgin or in a woman. And as soon as Esther shows up, he says, aha, where did this one come from? She immediately wins his favor. For verse 9 reads, and the young woman pleased him and won his favor. He quickly provided her with cosmetics and a portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace to serve her. And he advanced her from being in a local area, together with our women or our girls. Esther was moved to the best place in the harem. She got the best condominium in the estate. Esther got the best of the best. She is selected, and she has a beauty treatment scheduled for her and gets the best choice foods. She gets to select her menu items, and she gets rewarded 7 attendants, and she's placed in the best living quarters, the best living conditions possible. This is kind of ironical, right? From a farm girl to, I think I can get these 2 years to this situation. However, from the text, we see that Mordecai wants the best scenario for Esther and the best outcome for his cousin. He wants Esther to be chosen as the next queen, and he knows what she must do to get there. He wants her to be picked as the next queen of Persia, and therefore he comes to the gates every day every morning to make sure that Esther is okay. He instructs her not to reveal her nationality and family background. He says to Esther, keep this as a secret. Don't dare open your mouth. What does Mordecai know that we do not know? He is for sure concerned about Esther's safety at the harem. He knows that the majority of the girls were Persian girls, and the little they knew about Esther, the safer Esther was going to be. He also knew that the Hebrews were not regarded with high favor in these lands, for history tells us that the Hebrews had been slaves for years. This historical background would not have been in the favor of Esther at the harem. Therefore, Mordecai sees Esther's silence as being the best option. Her safety in the middle of a competitive and jealous harem of virgins was important to both Mordecai and Esther. Verse 16, or rather 15, therefore reads, when it was Esther's turn to go to the king, Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his daughter, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, had recommended. Esther, just as she was, won the admiration of everyone who saw her. Verse 17 and 18 reads, the king fell in love with Esther far more than with any of his other women or any of the other virgins. He was totally smitten by her. He placed a royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. Another translation reads in verse 17, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Well, so far, Esther has been obedient to Mordecai, to Haggai, and now to the king. If I read in between the lines and knowing the character of Esther, I did not see all excited as much as the other girls were. I'm sure she's feeling kind of a stranger at the harem residence and now at the palace. Esther must be missing Mordecai in spite of the opulence of the palace. She must be wondering about the way of these Persians. I think she's probably saying to herself, I do not need this drama and all of this stuff. In fact, the text reads, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, gave her. Esther is wondering how this ordeal is going to end, but she's sure and secure in her beauty and in herself. She is confident and she chooses to trust the words of wisdom from Mordecai. I see Esther wondering why she has to compromise her faith, her morals, and her beliefs just to entertain the king. Maybe she's almost ashamed of being in this Mordecaian plan, but she trusts in the words of Mordecai. She now has to eat the king's food, the Persian meals, which may have been a little bit outside our Jewish palate. Deep inside, she also knows that she does not belong and is wondering what will happen as soon as her nationality is discovered. I see this duality of emotions. There are not much details we can, in this text, but we can imagine Esther's situation and feel with her. I feel with her. I feel anxiety and hopelessness in the midst of this ordeal. She's caught in between two worlds, the Jewish world and our faith and our God, and the Persian world with all this pleasure and opportunities. What is Esther to do? When it comes to conflicts like this, Mother Teresa has these words of wisdom. I quote, "Let God use you without having to consult you first." End of quote. Esther knows that she has already compromised her faith and her belief system because she has lost her virginity to the king, even though she ends up marrying this Gentile king. I see her feeling fearful and anxious in the midst of a messy situation. Notice that Esther or Hadassah is given two names, maybe a literary concept by the king, by the author here, to show the conflict of faith that Esther has to face. But the text says that King Xerxes loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. While the other girls entertained the king and were referred to the care of Shashgaz, for they did not please the king, we find that Esther entertained the king and won the favor of the king. As you come to the end of verse 18, things kind of feel okay, but there's this feeling of, is this supposed to end like this? Why do I have mixed feelings here? What about the other girls? Is Esther happy that she had to defy her Jewish laws and her faith and to compromise her faith and her virginity just to be selected a queen? At this point, the antagonist of the story here, a man we will meet in chapter 3, his name is Haman. Haman has not been revealed yet. Yet Esther doesn't seem to have the big picture. She doesn't see how her story and her life fits in here, but she's hopeful and trusts the wisdom of Mordecai and in the faith of our God that things will be okay. We know that Mordecai has had a few brushes with Haman, and Mordecai seems to understand Haman's motives and intentions more than Haman thinks that and knows. And for Esther, I think it feels too much for nothing. Too much pain and sacrifice. All for this? Warren Weiss writes that when God permits his children to go through the furnace, he keeps his eye on the clock and his hand on the thermostat. His loving heart knows how much and how long. End of quote. Have you ever felt like you are part of something, but it's like God had abandoned you and that you are all alone? When you seem to cry out and not a single heavenly response comes your way. Those are the moments you spend in tears, in pain, and in sorrow, and in the why me question mode. When there seems to be no solution or sign of relief in the distant future. The psalmist felt this way. Psalm number 10 reads, "Why, O Lord, do you stand afar off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" And then in Psalm number 13, the psalmist continues to write, I quote, "O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way and hide your face? How long must I struggle and wrestle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart? Every day How long will the enemy have the upper hand? I want to submit to you that it is during this kind of moments, it is during moments like this when our faith is being tested that we get an opportunity to grow deeper in our relationship with God. When we go deeper, deeper to the ocean floor and we feel the pressure of that weight of water that we get to be formed the way God wants us to be. When our cries for help seem to go unanswered and our thirst for answers seem to go unquenched, God is shaping us, could he be? Or molding us to conform to his image. We are in the furnace and in the kiln so that our impurities may be burned. C.S. Lewis, one of the most powerful contemporary writers and the author of Chronicles of Narnia, he writes, I quote, "We can ignore pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. It removes the veil. It plants the flag of truth within the fortress of the soul." End of quote. If you were to ask me, this is not a happy ending at all. Yes, Esther has been made queen, but what's next? Is this just a means to the end? Okay, Mordecai, now I am queen. What is next in this plan of yours? What else am I supposed to do? Do you realize this king is not going to be faithful to me, uncle? He's a Casanova king. You know it, and everybody knows it. Queen Vashti knew it. Oscar, why do you think she failed to show up when the king called her? Answer me, uncle. I can hear Mordecai offering Esther assurance in the background. No, Esther, it's not just a means to an end. God is in this, Esther. Somehow, I don't know the whole story, but he is in charge of these little details. You are not alone, Esther. Be assured. I know you cannot see God acting in the background, but just be faithful in this. Trust in the God of Abraham and of Jacob and of Isaac, the God of our fathers who brought us out of Egyptian slavery. He has the blueprint and he knows of the sacrifices. He's aware of the sacrifice you just made, Esther. God has great plans for you, even if you cannot see his divine plan. Don't throw away the towel, Esther. Don't give up now, for he who began a good work in you will carry it to completion. Mordecai assures Esther. God is good in all of his plans, all the time. You who is watching this study and intrigued by this incredible story of Esther, maybe your question is this. You might be saying this to me, Doc. Should I therefore compromise my faith so that God can be seen in the process? My response to you is this. No, no, no. May it never be so. God still has his demands of holiness. Be holy, for he who has called you is holy. Stay on course, for God is in control. You are known and loved by God, and God cares for you. Pastor and author David Jeremiah, in his book, A Bend in the Road, writes, and I quote, "Sometimes we come to life's crossroads and we view what we think is the end. But God has a much wider vision, and he knows that it's only a bend. The road will go on and get smoother. And after we have stopped for a rest, the path that lies hidden beyond us is often the path that is best. End of quote. Ask those who have gone before you. Ask those who have faced challenges in life, and they'll say this to you. Stay on course and do not waver to the left nor to the right. Friends, maybe the question we should be asking ourselves during moments like this is not, where is God in situations like this? Where is God when we are suffering? But rather, where are we in our relationship with Him? When we experience the pain, the loneliness, and the suffering, where are we in our walk of faith? Scott Peck, in his book, The Road Less Troubled, writes, life is difficult. End of quote. But I respond to him, yes, life is difficult, and difficult is the only path to true wisdom. Apostle Paul, in response to these disrupted and difficult moments in life, moments when it seems like God is absent and silence, writes, I quote, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. Apostle James reminds us as well that consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance and steadfastness. 1 Peter 4:13 reads, but rejoice in as much as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. Tim Keller writes in Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering that while other worldviews leads us to sit in the midst of life's joys, foreseeing the coming sorrows, Christianity empowers its people to sit in the midst of this world's sorrows, testing the coming joy. The text read that the king loved Esther far more than all the other women and any of the other virgins, for he was smitten by her, and she won grace and favor in his sight, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all of his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. This king, who was known for his harshness and for his cruelty and his promiscuity, the Casanova king and the king of drunkenness, changed because of Esther and the favor that she had brought to the palace. I will leave the exposition of this text or that verse to the pastors on the pulpit. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor, and he placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. 8 years later, the king finds a replacement for Vashti. He finds a wife. No wonder the Bible says he who finds a wife finds a good thing. The Jews can now not just survive, but they are going to thrive with Esther at the palace. The king will now love Esther for as long as God is going to allow him to. Esther's life matters, and so does the life of the Jews. God is good, for he is the king of our lives, the king who is just and fair. His divine providence never fails, and he will use all means and all kinds of people to accomplish his purposes and to preserve his own. Kindly prescribe to this channel so you can get a notification when we discuss the details of chapter 3 in this intriguing book of Esther. Thank you for taking your precious time to learn with me. I appreciate you. And remember, you are loved. Thank you so much. Be blessed.